Welcome to the Generation Kids Daily Devo podcast, where we move from wonder to worship, looking for God at work in the world around us, ready to ask the tough questions and discover what His Word has to say to us. Today's episode is titled, Learning the Hard Way, and it comes from me, Casey Taylor. All week, we've been encouraging each other in the reality that God wants to communicate with us. He wants to talk to us, and not just to us, but with us. But what happens when we know that, and we've heard His voice, and then still choose to ignore what we hear Him saying to us?
No way.
It's incredible to know that God wants to have a close relationship with us. But what if He asks us to do something we're not excited about? Or what if He asks us not to do something that sounds fun or more exciting than what He wants us to do?
Oh, come on, man.
What if I told you that it was possible not just to hear God's voice, but for God to literally show up in a pillar of clouds by day and a pillar of fire by night, and to still ignore His voice and instructions? That's what happened to the Israelites after they were freed from slavery in Egypt. God literally traveled with them to teach them to trust Him. He was always present with them, either as a cloud by day or a pillar of fire by night. Can you imagine this? If God was literally physically there with you, where you could see Him in a form that didn't kill you? You'd think that the Israelites would see that as a special relationship and dynamic with their God, that He was there with them, guiding them and speaking to them. You would think so, but that's not what happened. The Israelites actually complained a lot. You see, for some of the Israelites, what they wanted wasn't God. What they actually wanted was just a God that could give them the things that they wanted. They wanted to obey Him only if it meant getting something in return. They would see God as good if He did for them what their actions or entitlement thought that they should merit. So basically, what can I earn or get out of God? So when God asked them to do something costly or something that wasn't centered around their desires, sometimes they just ignored it. Like not marrying people from tribes who worshipped false gods. The Israelites heard God, but thought maybe something like, listen, God, I hear you, but there are some really good-looking guys and girls over there. I'm sure it'll be fine. Only it wasn't fine to God. He had set them apart for His glory, and He wanted them not to fall into worshiping other false gods as they tried to fit in with their new extended families, worshiping their gods and not upholding the standards that God had set for them as His people. They heard God and had a special relationship with Him. I mean, God was literally there in their midst, but their appetites for their own control and satisfaction, which were guided by their own desires, continually won out instead of pleasing God. And it led them to destruction. Not forever, but they didn't get the best of what God had for them when they could have had it. Instead, they had to wander outside of the Promised Land for 40 years.
Where are we going?
Facing death, disease, disappointment, and discipline from God in the process. Have you ever had to face the consequences of hearing what is right and then doing what you wanted to instead? I sure have. I've been like the Israelites a lot in my life, learning the hard way. I, like many kids, loved to collect baseball cards when I was growing up. Because as I've said before, I loved baseball so much. And my lack of finances severely hindered my ability to buy as many baseball cards as I would have liked. So there was a time when my desire to have newer ones got the best of me. And I grabbed a pack of cards while I was walking around the store, and I opened them up without paying for them. And I knew it was wrong, that I hadn't bought and earned the right to those cards. But I wanted them. And in that moment, that was the only thing that was important to me. I could sense God telling me it was wrong, but I grabbed those cards, opened them up, and started to scan for any good cards that I could take home with me anyway. And once I did, I stashed the ones that I didn't want, along with the wrapper, behind something on a shelf. And that's when I heard it. Oh man, why did you do that? Now I have to report you. Kid, you need to come with me. I'd been caught red-handed, or at least with a handful of stolen baseball cards. And there was nowhere to run. my mom was shopping in another section in the store, and so I tried to sneak those cards while she did, but I'd gotten caught, and now I was going to have to face the consequences. My mom and I almost got banned from that store forever, so they told me anyway, but they let me off with a warning, and I got to pay for those cards in other ways over the coming days. And let's just say that the price was way higher at home than it would have been at the store. The writer of Hebrews 3:15 warns us away from this situation when he tells us,
"Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your heart as in the rebellion."
What he means is this. Remember what happened to the Israelites and how poorly it went for them. God doesn't want that for you. In the same way that God proved his faithfulness to the Israelites and traveled with them to help them learn to trust him, he wants you to learn to trust him too. And to caution you against thinking God is just there when you need something from him to satisfy your own appetites. He wants to give you more of himself, but on his terms. He wants to talk to you, but he wants you to listen and to trust him as he does. He's got good plans for you. Will you trust him? Will you listen and obey even when it's not what you want? God knew what the Israelites needed better than even they did. And I pray that you learn to trust that he knows what's best for you, too. Now it's time for
Today's Big Question!
Today's big question is, what is something that is hard for you to do, even though you know it's right? Or what is something that you know is wrong that you find it hard not to do? Say a prayer and admit that to God. Saying it out loud and talking to God will give you the opportunity to have an honest conversation with him. And when you ask him to help you stay strong and to trust him with those things, you aren't fighting them alone. You're fighting them with the God whose strength knows no equal. Thanks for listening to the Generation Kids Daily Devo podcast. If you want to keep in touch with us on all our social media platforms, check out the links in the description. And if you'd like to help support us as we continue to create meaningful content for kids of all generations, please subscribe to our Patreon by visiting us at patreon.com/wearegenerationkids.